So I recently picked up the Sony RX1R, a compact full-frame camera, and I wanted to tell you some of the pros and cons that I have experienced with this camera so far. The biggest pros of this camera by far for me are, of course, its compact size and image quality. Even though this camera is from 2013, the image quality still, to me, looks incredibly fresh and it has character. So it has a full-frame sensor as well as this fixed 35mm f2 lens, which is absolutely like so many chef's kisses. I cannot chef's kiss enough. In combination with the 24 megapixel full frame sensor in this tiny compact camera size camera, like it's seriously so insanely small, especially when I'm out and about taking portraits of strangers. With smaller cameras, I feel like it's less intimidating for somebody I have never met before if I just go up to a random stranger, especially dressed like a freaking vampire like I do. And this RX1R is so good with portraiture and capturing a little bit of even background blur because the lens does have an f2 aperture. It's incredibly detailed. It's not a perfect lens, like you do see some chromatic aberrations, some purple and green fringing. One of the biggest limitations on this camera is there's no built-in ND filter, so if you're shooting in bright sunlight or something and you want to use that f2 aperture, every shot's gonna be like way too bright. You definitely need an ND filter on this lens if you wanna shoot in bright sunlight, still using the widest aperture of f2. But the workaround for that is setting your aperture to a higher setting and closing it up a little bit. And I like that there is a manual aperture ring on there. It's nice and clickable. It feels really smooth and beautiful. I was going back and forth between this one and like an RX100 or even like a Fujifilm X100V or X106, Ricoh GR3, you know, all the street photographer compact cameras. And I kept coming back to this one because number one, I really like the Sony camera system. Like pretty much all the cameras I use for the most part are Sony. So I'm familiar with the way the menus work. And the menus are pretty good overall on this camera. It's pretty intuitive, but it definitely feels archaic. It feels definitely like 2013 kind of energy. It's intuitive, but it's kind of limited. You can't dive into incredibly detailed settings for the most part. But I do like that there are limitations with this camera. I feel like when we have more limits, it forces us to be a little more creative. So this is not the kind of camera where you have like 32 buttons that are customizable. This is designed for people who want really high image quality, but they don't necessarily want to fiddle around with all the settings, and they would rather just have like a simple point and shoot, but you get really good quality. The video quality is also okay, but it's nothing to write home about. It maxes out at 1080p, and it's good, but it's not incredible, especially because this camera does not have in-body image stabilization, which is kind of a bummer. Not a deal breaker, but it's a bummer, especially if you're shooting video. Like you will notice a lot of like the micro jitters when you're shooting video with this thing. And because this is a fixed lens, there's no way to put like an OSS lens or something on here so you can get at least a little bit of steadiness in your videos. But I got this camera so I could shoot photos. I am primarily a photographer. This camera I see as like my dedicated walking around taking portraits of strangers and like street photography type of camera. And because this is the RX1R, they got rid of the anti-aliasing filter. So it's basically the same exact camera as the RX1, but without the AA filter, which means the photos will be slightly sharper and maybe a little bit more detail. And you can see by the images on the screen, and I can tell you from my own experience so far, that this camera produces insane amounts of sharpness and detail. It's almost too sharp where I have to amp it down a little bit in Lightroom. But y'all, the raw files that come out of this camera are superb. The color science is actually pretty good overall. It does take like maybe a little bit more editing in Lightroom, especially to match skin tones. But overall, I am not disappointed at the image quality. My biggest ding on that though is the amount of chromatic aberration that you do see in this lens. Again, especially if you are blurring the background a lot and there's like a bright background. A lot of times you'll see the green fringing and purple fringing. It can be a huge issue for sure. You can correct it a little bit in Lightroom, so it's not like the end of the world. And honestly, there's something freeing about using a slightly older camera that has some imperfections, where I'm kind of practicing not wanting every single thing to be perfect, like letting go of this idea of perfection, that the image, in order to be a good image or a perfect image, has to be flawless technically. There are a ton of examples of photographs that have made huge impacts on history and on culture, and just photographs that I really, really enjoy where they're not technically perfect if you're like pixel peeping and looking at all the details and stuff, but it's more about the overall image. It's more about your vision as an artist and as a photographer. Like, what are you trying to say? Who are you as a person, and how is that being translated into your camera of choice? So for me, all the little imperfections in the chromatic aberrations or whatever with this camera have helped me actually just embrace imperfection a little bit more and get me out of that mindset that things need to be technically perfect in order to be a good or a powerful image, because I don't think they really do. Build quality is also pretty amazing. It feels like a mostly metal construction, not a whole lot of like cheap plastic feeling on this. And technically this is not a weather sealed or dust resistant type of build, so that does make me a little bit nervous with this camera. I do feel like I baby it a little more than I would with a weather sealed camera. And so far I haven't had any issues, knock on hair wood, with like dust and that kind of thing. And if there is dust on this camera, if you do see some dust on the sensor or something, unfortunately there's no way to clean the sensor on this unless you get it professionally serviced somewhere, which I hear can cost almost as much as this camera, like $800 plus. But it does feel a tiny bit fragile, so this is not one that I would really like throw into a bag. But besides not having weather sealing or dust protection, the build quality feels really solid overall. So this camera actually does have a built-in pop-up flash. It worked okay the first couple times I tried it. Not the most powerful flash in the world, but when I was taking photos the other night, I popped the flash open and took a photo and something felt off. So I took another photo with the flash and the flash didn't go off at all. And then I took another one, it didn't go off at all. So when I got home, I was like, what is up with this freaking flash? So I opened up the flash again, I took a few sample photos, and something was definitely off. It only went off once, and then on the like 4th and 5th exposure, the flash basically exploded. Like it flashed super bright twice, and I smelled something a little electric of like wires burning or something. So the flash seems like it just completely exploded and stopped working. And apparently that's a known issue with the RX1 series of cameras. Another thing I really don't like about this camera is the ergonomics of it. It's obviously not meant to be like a grippy camera like the A7C II, which has this big grip over here, and it just ergonomically feels so much better than the RX1R, where the RX1R has a little bit of a grip, but barely anything, and it has a little bit of that like plasticky, grippy texture, and there's a little bit of a grip also on the back. Overall, it's not a deal breaker, like at least there is a little bit of grip on here, but this isn't a camera that feels really comfortable in my hand, which is why I definitely would suggest using this with a wrist strap or a neck strap. There's also no viewfinder on this camera, which is kind of unfortunate, but honestly, even when there's a viewfinder available, I typically don't even use it because I prefer the screen. The screen quality is actually really good on this camera, but a huge bummer is you can't touch to do anything. Like this is not a touch screen, so you can't like tap to focus or tap to take a picture or even use your finger in the menu system. It's not a touch screen, which is kind of annoying, especially when you're wanting to focus in on something in particular, but the camera's not quite getting it, which brings me in an interesting and totally improvised segue into my next huge flaw, and probably the biggest flaw, honestly, and that to me is the autofocus system. It's slow, it's inaccurate. Sometimes it's so inaccurate that it completely misses a really nicely brightly lit shot that would be like pretty easy for most cameras. Especially in low light, it is just slow as hell. It is hunting around, it is flickering, it is like possessed by some kind of demon. But when it does nail the focus, which it does maybe 85–90% of the time, the focus is tack sharp. Details are insane with this camera. And it even has like an antique version of a face tracking mode. And there is object tracking as well, but I would definitely not rely on that 100% with this camera. So overall, my first impressions of this camera are I freaking adore it. This camera is so tiny and it is so cute that it actually inspires me to just go out and shoot. The compact size, the amazing lens, and the full frame sensor make this camera 100% worth the money. Yes, the technology is not the newest in the world and it's not the best with autofocus and the flash doesn't even freaking work anymore. But for what it is and having these kind of constraints, again, it helps me be more creative and more observant about what's around me. So fun factor is there, technology is almost there. Image quality is definitely there. Portability is definitely there, though it does jet out a little bit with this lens. Like the lens does make it not necessarily pocketable, but you can throw this like in a small bag or something pretty easily. So let me know what you think in the comments. Have you tried the RX1R? And if you watched all the way to the end of this video, leave a basketball emoji in the comments down below. Smash all the buttons down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.